I'm a 32-year-old guy, and I've spent most of my adult life working, saving, and making sure every penny counts. For the past decade, I've been holding on to one goal, buying my dream house. I worked multiple jobs, budgeted like crazy, gave up vacations, and kept things bare minimum, all because I wanted a place that felt like mine, a space that I could shape into exactly what I'd always pictured. After years of hustling, I finally found the perfect house. It's close to the city, so my commute isn't terrible, but far enough out that I get peace and quiet. It's not huge, but it's got everything I need, a cozy vibe, modern finishes, and just enough space to feel comfortable without a bunch of empty rooms. I mean, this place even has a little deck out back where I can set up a grill or just relax with a book. And most importantly, I could afford it without needing anyone else's help. So here I am, standing on the brink of finally getting the keys to this house, and everything feels like it's falling into place. But as soon as my family got wind of the house and heard I was closing in on the down payment, things started shifting fast. First, there were little comments here and there. My parents mentioned how they'd recently taken a hit financially. They lost a big chunk of money in some investment that didn't pan out. They didn't directly ask me for help, but the hint was heavy, and I could feel them testing the waters. Then my sister chimed in, casually mentioning that maybe I should look into a slightly bigger house, just in case. At first, I thought it was a joke. Why would I need a bigger place? I'm a single guy, and the house I picked out was perfect for me. Plus, every square foot costs extra, not just in price, but in upkeep and utilities. But she kept mentioning it. Her reasoning: it might be good if our parents ever need a place to stay, or if I ever need to crash somewhere temporarily. She said it like it was nothing, but I knew where it was going. I told her the house I chose was exactly the right size for me. I've spent years planning for this, and I don't need extra space that's going to sit there unused. She gave me a look like I was being unreasonable, but I figured it would blow over. Well, that was only the beginning. Every time I see my family now, the house comes up. They talk about it like it's already theirs, like it's some kind of family asset that I just happen to be holding for everyone else's use. My mom has this way of dropping hints that feel more like expectations. She talks about how lucky I am to finally be buying a place of my own and how much family means everything, especially during hard times. Then, she'll bring up how we all have to be there for each other and give me this knowing look. It didn't stop there. They started getting more direct, even calling me to check in, and then somehow finding a way to steer the conversation back to how one more room could make the place even more comfortable if, for instance, someone needed to stay there for a bit. At this point, I'm getting stressed. Even my friends started noticing that I wasn't myself. I'd get texts from them reminding me to stick to my plan, telling me not to let anyone else's problems shake what I'd worked so hard to achieve. But every time I'd visit my family, it felt like a fresh wave of guilt and pressure was waiting for me. The conversations would always circle back to the same topic, no matter how much I tried to steer them away. Then I hit a rough patch at work. I was so distracted that I ended up making a mistake, and my boss gave me a serious talk. I realized I couldn't let my family's expectations mess up my job too, but it was wearing me down bit by bit, because I knew the second I brought up the house, the entire family would pile on with their suggestions. Eventually, I snapped a little. My sister had come over, and after she made another remark about getting a more suitable place, I let her know exactly how hard it was to save for this house. I told her about all the weekends I spent working extra shifts and the things I had to skip to save every last bit. She seemed to feel guilty for a moment, but then told me our family was in a unique situation. In other words, I should still consider everyone else's needs above my own. The final straw was when my parents offered to take care of the house for me. They said if I were to buy a bigger one, they could help keep it in shape until I needed it. It was clear they had it all planned out, my money, their future. I couldn't believe they were serious, but here we were, with them acting like the house was already halfway theirs. That's when I turned to Reddit. I figured maybe I was missing something, or maybe I was just being selfish. I laid it all out there, hoping for some perspective. The response was overwhelming. So many people sided with me, telling me that I wasn't responsible for anyone else's financial decisions, that I had every right to keep my hard-earned home for myself. Some users warned me about the ways family can try to manipulate and guilt trip, and it honestly opened my eyes. It was a huge relief to see people backing me up. But little did I know, this was only the beginning of what my family had in store. Update 1. It didn't take long for my family to find out about the Reddit post. I'd shared it there to get an outsider's perspective, and the response had been eye-opening. But I didn't count on a cousin of mine, who's really into Reddit, stumbling across it. She knew it was me right away and wasted no time alerting the family group chat. Within hours, I got a flurry of calls and texts. The tone was very different this time. My parents wanted a word. They showed up at my place the next day, both looking serious, and they didn't waste any time getting into it. They were upset, mostly about me airing private family matters to strangers online. My mom said that family issues should stay within the family. They acted like I had betrayed them, like I was putting our business out there just to embarrass them. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd been so willing to share my house as a family asset, but suddenly privacy mattered when it was their issues on display. But this wasn't just a sit-down talk, it escalated quickly. Right then and there, they announced that they wanted a full family meeting to talk about family obligations and how everyone could be more supportive of each other. It sounded like a subtle way to pressure me, but I agreed to go, figuring I might as well hear them out one more time. The family meeting was set for the weekend, and my parents made it clear this was mandatory. I knew what I was walking into, a room full of disappointed faces, the same ones who had been dropping hints about upgrading the house for weeks now, but I was still caught off guard by just how much they had planned to lay out. When I arrived, it was already tense. My mom, dad, sister, and a few other relatives were all there, and the vibe was a mix of intervention and interrogation. As soon as I sat down, they started explaining that it wasn't just about me getting a bigger house. They felt it would be in everyone's best interest if I contributed more financially to help out a few relatives who had recently hit tough times. Apparently, it wasn't enough to just have a bigger house. Now I was expected to help cover expenses for others too. They threw around phrases like doing the right thing for the family and sharing your blessings. My dad even pulled out a notepad where he had scribbled out numbers, showing what he thought would be a fair amount for me to contribute toward various family members' debts and living expenses. They'd basically mapped out how I could spread my savings to cover their needs, on top of putting down a larger deposit for a house that could fit everyone comfortably. When I finally spoke up, I was blunt. I told them I'd worked too hard and sacrificed too much for years to achieve this goal, and I wasn't going to sacrifice my dreams now that I was this close. I reminded them that this was my house, my savings, and my decision. I didn't owe anyone a bigger house, let alone financial support on top of it. The room went quiet for a moment, and I thought maybe they'd finally get it. But then my parents gave me an ultimatum. They said that if I refused to help, they would have to reconsider our relationship. They went on about how family support went both ways and implied that I might lose family privileges if I didn't go along with their plan. My sister even chimed in, saying she had always thought I'd be more supportive of the family and that I was letting everyone down. The guilt was thick, but I held my ground and told them that I needed to do this for myself. After that, the cold shouldering began almost immediately. Family members stopped reaching out, and every attempt I made to text or call was met with short, dismissive replies. It was like they'd put up a wall, and they wanted me to know that I was now on the outside. Then, the extended family got involved. Aunts and uncles started calling, each one with the same message in their own way. Don't you think you're being a little selfish? Or maybe you'll reconsider for the family's sake. It was exhausting. I felt like every phone call or message was another attempt to guilt me into folding. Luckily, I had a solid group of friends who were there for me through all of it. I confided in them about everything that was happening, and they reminded me not to give in. They told me that I'd worked hard for my house and had every right to set boundaries, especially if those boundaries were being blatantly ignored by my family. Without their encouragement, I don't know if I'd have been able to stay strong through it all. Meanwhile, the messages from my siblings didn't stop. They would reach out separately, emphasizing how tough times were and hinting that they wouldn't forget it if I refused to help. It was like each family member had taken on a different role. My parents were giving me ultimatums, my siblings were trying to guilt trip me, and the extended family was chiming in for added pressure. As things heated up, I decided to post an update on Reddit to get more advice and see if I was missing something. The comments flooded in, with most people telling me to stand firm and watch out for further manipulation. A few suggested legal steps, which got me thinking. I wasn't planning on involving lawyers, but it became clear that I needed to protect myself in case things got worse. So I consulted a lawyer. I wanted to understand my options in case any family members tried to lay claim to my house or create problems down the line. It was just a consultation, but having that backup felt like a weight off my shoulders. Of course, when my family found out about the lawyer, it was like I'd declared war. They accused me of putting money over family and said that I'd chosen strangers on the internet over my own blood. By the end of all this, I was drained. I'd set my boundaries, but it felt like I was in a tug of war, with my family pulling harder every time. Despite the support I was getting online and from friends, I couldn't shake the feeling of being isolated from the people who were supposed to be closest to me. I wasn't sure how much more I could take, but I knew I wasn't backing down. Update 2. The pressure from my family didn't let up. Just when I thought I'd weathered the worst of it, my mom sent me a long letter. It arrived in my mailbox one morning, handwritten and stuffed with everything she could think of to tug at my guilt. She filled it with memories, stories from when I was a kid, times we'd all helped each other out. She kept repeating how family is all we have, as if that phrase could somehow change my mind about everything. It was pages of her laying it on thick, saying that no matter what, family should come first, and that I should be willing to sacrifice a bit to keep us all close. I had barely finished reading when my dad's message came through. This wasn't a letter, he called me directly. He was a lot more direct than my mom, telling me I was too independent for my own good, and that I needed to stop acting like I'd made it here on my own. He went on about how family support had been behind everything I'd done, implying that I owed them for any success I'd found. He didn't outright ask me to get a bigger house or offer money, but he didn't have to. His words left no doubt about what he expected. Then my sister reached out. This time, she went a different route, messaging me privately to ask for a loan. She claimed she was in a tight spot, just for a little while, and promised she'd pay it back once she got back on her feet. But I could see what was happening. She was still hoping I'd give in and start offering financial support. I replied politely, saying I couldn't do that right now. I told her I needed to keep my funds secure, especially with such a big financial commitment on the line. She didn't take it well, but it seemed like she didn't want to argue, so she just left it at that, for the moment. Not even a week passed before I got a call inviting me to another family meeting. I knew where this was going, but I showed up anyway, trying to keep things civil. Once again, the entire family was there, and this time, the mood was even more tense. They went on about how deeply hurt they all were and brought up the sacrifices they'd made for me over the years. My mom looked at me with this expression that seemed to say, "Look what you're doing to us." Then came the ultimatum. They made it clear that if I couldn't help or at least make more family-oriented choices, I'd be risking my place with them. It was a lot of indirect words, but the message was clear. They wanted me to bend, or I'd lose whatever support they were still offering. They didn't directly say I'd be cut off, but they made it sound like my choices would have permanent consequences. After that meeting, I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was being selfish, and maybe I really did owe them something. They'd always been in my life, and cutting them out felt wrong. I decided to speak to a therapist about everything that was happening. She listened, and after I'd laid it all out, she reassured me that I had a right to prioritize myself. Family or not, boundaries were healthy, especially when others couldn't respect them. With a clearer head, I decided to post an update on Reddit, hoping to hear if others had been through something similar. The response was even more supportive than before. People encouraged me to stand firm and set my boundaries, telling me that guilt tactics were common in situations like this. Some even shared their own family struggles, which gave me some peace of mind that I wasn't being unreasonable. Not long after, my sister came back with another idea. She asked if she could temporarily stay with me, just until she got back on her feet. It was framed like a small favor, but I could see where it would lead. I knew she'd stay longer than promised, and then more family members would be asking for the same. I told her firmly that I didn't want to turn my house into a shared space or a backup plan for anyone. I'd saved for this dream, and I wasn't ready to give it up. After that, things turned icy. My parents began excluding me from family events, group chats, and even holiday plans. It wasn't just ignoring me, they were letting me know I wasn't welcome, unless I changed my mind. My aunt, who usually didn't get involved, called me directly, saying she'd heard everything and that I should reconsider for the family's sake. She mentioned how much easier it would be if we could all be close and support each other. When I still refused, she hung up on me. And then came the final blow. My parents took to social media. They made a post hinting that they'd been abandoned by someone they loved and that they were disappointed by choices made in favor of money over family. They didn't name me, but everyone knew who they were talking about. Comments poured in from relatives and family friends, all sending them sympathy, and some even reaching out to me, implying I'd made a terrible choice. Back on Reddit, I shared this part of the story, and it exploded. People jumped in to show support, sharing their own stories about family manipulations and how difficult it can be to stand firm. Reading those comments gave me a sense of peace, knowing I wasn't alone in this. In the end, all of this only made me more determined to move forward with my plans alone. I didn't need the constant demands, the guilt, or the pressure. My family might not understand, and they might never agree with my choice, but I knew I had to protect what I'd worked so hard to achieve. This house, my dream, was finally in reach, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. Update 3. Not long after my family cut me off from events and group chats, they came back with another tactic. This time, they went straight for the legal side of things. My parents called me, saying that since I was so insistent on going through with this house purchase, they had a proposal to make things easier on everyone. They suggested that it would be smart if they co-signed on the property with me, not because they'd help financially, but just in case I ever needed help managing it. They framed it like they were being generous, as if they were offering me a lifeline. I felt my guard go up. Co-signing meant they'd have their names on the house. When I pressed them on why that was necessary, they gave vague answers, mentioning family security, and that they'd feel more comfortable knowing they had a say in what happened with the property. After pushing a bit further, their intentions started to slip. They hinted that co-owning would give them some security if they ever found themselves in financial trouble down the line, like they could sell or leverage the property if they needed to. It finally hit me, this wasn't about helping me manage the house, it was about having a backup plan for themselves. They saw my house as a potential financial safety net. I had spent years saving, cutting back, and working extra hours to get to this point, and now they wanted a piece of it, just in case. When I told them I wasn't interested, things went downhill fast. My dad, sounding angrier than ever, accused me of being selfish and turning my back on family values. Then came the ultimate threat. They disowned me, saying that if I couldn't see the importance of family and was choosing a house over them, they'd have to cut ties for good. Right after that conversation, my friends stepped in. They'd been by my side through this whole mess, and when they found out what had happened, they organized a small support group. We met up, and they kept reminding me why I'd come this far, and that I wasn't being selfish by keeping what I'd worked so hard for. They even offered to help with anything I needed, whether it was advice or just someone to vent to. I knew they had my back, and that gave me the strength to keep going. Around this time, my therapist also encouraged me to stick with my boundaries. She reminded me that I had a right to my independence, and that I didn't need to sacrifice it just to please others. Hearing this from a professional grounded me, and I knew that I had to protect myself, no matter what my family said. I posted another update on Reddit, laying out the latest twist. The response was huge. People flooded in with legal advice and tips on how to safeguard my assets. Some users recommended that I add protective clauses to my property and finances to prevent my family from pulling any tricks down the line. With this advice, I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer, who helped me set up financial safeguards and make sure my family couldn't interfere with my property. Once my family heard I was taking legal steps, they exploded. I got a final email from my parents, a last-minute plea for me to come to my senses. They begged me to reconsider everything, framing it like I was abandoning them in their time of need. They talked about how family was everything, how I'd regret this decision, and that I was risking losing the people who'd always been there for me. But I knew by now that this was just another attempt to get me to back down. Reddit was there for me as usual. People rallied around, reinforcing that I was doing the right thing and sharing stories of similar family struggles. Reading their experiences, I felt a new kind of resolve. It wasn't just about keeping my house, It was about drawing a line and setting a precedent that I wasn't a backup plan or a financial resource. I had to protect what I'd built, even if it meant losing connections with people who I thought would support me, no matter what. After that email, the communication stopped. My family went completely silent. No more calls, no more messages, no more attempts to persuade or guilt trip me. It was like they'd cut me off entirely. It felt strange at first, but over the next few days, I realized how much lighter life felt without that constant pressure hanging over me. The silence turned out to be a relief. Finally, the day came to close on the house. I walked through each room, taking in everything. This was a house I'd saved for, a dream I'd held onto through years of work and sacrifice. I could almost feel the weight lifting as I went through the process, signing the papers and making it official. It was a mix of emotions, part relief, part sadness for how things had turned out with my family. But in the end, I felt free. Moving day was quiet but powerful. My friends came to help, filling the space with laughter and light. They cheered me on as I unpacked, and that empty house began to feel like a real home, built with my choices and my hard work. There was no family drama, no strings attached, just a clean slate and a space to finally live my life on my terms. As I settled in, I realized that I wasn't losing anything by standing my ground. I was gaining a new sense of peace and independence. The journey had been tough, but now, standing in my own home, I felt ready for whatever came next. I'd fought for this, and for the first time in a long time, I was exactly where I wanted to be. Update 4. After finally settling into my house, I thought I'd reached a place of peace. But one afternoon, I pulled up to my driveway and saw several cars parked outside. I knew right away it was my family. My parents, along with a few other relatives, were standing on my front steps, waiting for me. They had apparently dropped by to see the house and had brought a few family members along, as if it were a casual get-together. As soon as I walked up, they greeted me and started asking for a tour. I felt trapped but figured that a quick walk-through might discourage any future surprise visits. I led them through the house, showing them the rooms, the kitchen, and the backyard, hoping they'd see that it wasn't some grand mansion with extra rooms to spare. But instead, they started making comments about how nice it would be if there were just a few more rooms for everyone. One of my aunts even pointed out a space where a second guest room could fit nicely. Then my sister chimed in, casually mentioning that she had a job transfer coming up and might need a temporary place to stay. She was just thinking out loud, but it was clear she was testing the waters. I stopped the tour, turning to everyone, and reminded them that this was my home, not a place where people could come and go as they pleased. I said I wasn't looking for any roommates or temporary house guests. The air grew tense, and I could see they weren't happy with my response. My parents pulled me aside into the kitchen, away from the others, and started in on a familiar guilt trip. They pointed out how fortunate I was to be in this position, compared to other family members who were struggling. My mom's voice grew softer as she mentioned how they'd raised me to be generous, and that, at the end of the day, family is all we have in this world. She even got a bit emotional, her voice breaking as she asked if I'd forgotten all the ways they'd helped me get here. I could feel the pressure mounting, but I kept my ground, reminding them of the years it had taken to get here, the sacrifices, and that this house was something I'd earned. They left after that, but I could tell it wasn't over. The next morning, I found out my parents had taken to social media again. They made another vague post about feeling abandoned by those you love the most. Relatives and family friends flooded the comments, sending their sympathies and asking if everything was all right. A few of them must have reached out privately too, because I started getting texts from cousins and family friends. The messages were all similar, saying they'd heard I was abandoning the family during a time of need. I decided to confide in my therapist, who had been a steady support throughout this whole ordeal. I explained everything, how they'd shown up unannounced, the pressure to house my sister, and the guilt trips. My therapist reminded me that I wasn't responsible for their financial issues, and that setting boundaries was essential for my own well-being. Her support helped me keep my resolve, even as the pressure mounted. Just when I thought things were cooling down, I got a message from my sister. She didn't hold back this time. She told me that unless I opened up the house to help the family, I'd be cut off from family gatherings for good. It was a clear ultimatum, and it stung. But instead of responding, I chose silence. I'd already made my boundaries clear, and there was nothing left to explain. If they wanted to stop including me because I wouldn't sacrifice my home, then so be it. I took things a step further this time. After talking it over with my friends and getting advice from Reddit, I sent a formal letter through my lawyer, outlining that I expected no further harassment or manipulation regarding my property. The letter was firm but polite, making it clear that my boundaries weren't negotiable. When the extended family got wind of this, the backlash was intense. They couldn't believe I'd go so far as to send a legal notice to my own family. Some relatives reached out to tell me I was taking things too far just to protect my precious house. It was exhausting, but at this point, I was past the guilt. I knew this was something I had to do if I wanted to keep my life in order. After all the drama, I had a moment of clarity. This whole struggle wasn't just about a house. My family had always exerted a level of control over me, expecting me to go along with their plans, share in their financial burdens, and be available whenever they needed something. Buying this house and setting these boundaries was about more than just real estate. It was about finally establishing my independence. The next few days were quiet. For the first time, my phone wasn't blowing up with messages or calls from family members. It seemed the lawyer's letter had finally sent the message that I wasn't going to back down. I was left alone to enjoy my new home in peace. I spent the weekend setting up my space just the way I wanted, hanging up the art I'd collected over the years, arranging my furniture, and making the place truly mine. My friends came by with a few housewarming gifts, and we spent the evening laughing, grilling in the backyard, and celebrating. It was the first time I felt at home, knowing that this space was mine alone. As I looked around, I realized that setting these boundaries wasn't just about standing up for my house. It was about claiming my life, my choices, and my future. The road to this point had been tough, but it was worth it. I'd finally broken free, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Update 5. After the lawyer's letter went out, my family finally went quiet. No calls, no texts, no unexpected visits. At first, the silence felt strange, almost like waiting for the other shoe to drop. But as the days passed, the weight of it all lifted, and I started to settle into a new rhythm. Without the constant guilt trips and demands, my home finally felt like my own space. For the first time, I had peace. With this newfound quiet, I began focusing on what mattered to me. I still saw my therapist regularly, and we talked about ways to keep family boundaries healthy in the future. Those sessions became my time to work through everything, helping me understand how to stay firm without feeling guilty. I didn't realize how much I'd needed that kind of support until now. My friends rallied around me too. They started dropping by on weekends, bringing snacks, movies, and the kind of warmth that had been missing in the house. We spent entire evenings grilling in the backyard, watching movies, and just hanging out. Slowly, they began to feel like my chosen family. We laughed about the strange journey that had led to this point, and in those moments, the drama with my family felt like a distant memory. Then, one afternoon, I got a message from my sister. It was a surprise, considering how things had ended between us. She didn't jump right into an apology, but she admitted that maybe she'd pushed too hard. She wrote that she still thought I owed something to the family, but realized she might have gone too far. Her tone was softer than before, less accusatory. I thought about how to respond. In the end, I kept my reply gentle but firm, letting her know that I loved her and the rest of the family but needed to make choices that were best for me. I emphasized that this wasn't about abandoning anyone, it was about building the life I'd always worked toward. She read the message and didn't respond, but at least the air felt clearer. Once word got out that my sister had reached out, a few extended relatives contacted me too. Some were supportive, saying they understood why I'd drawn a line, and they hoped we could stay in touch. But others kept up with the guilt tripping, insisting that family was more important than petty disagreements over money. I kept my replies brief, making it clear I wouldn't engage in arguments. If they didn't understand, there wasn't much I could do. With the family pressure fading, I focused more on my own well-being. I started setting up a morning routine, taking a few minutes each day to read, go for a walk, or simply enjoy a quiet coffee on the back deck. These little moments made the house feel more like a home. They became my way of grounding myself, a reminder of why I'd fought so hard to keep this place. To share my journey with others who had supported me online, I posted a final update on Reddit. I wanted to thank everyone who'd been there for me through the twists and turns, offering advice, encouragement, and even just validation. The response was overwhelming. People poured into the comments with messages of support, telling me I'd done the right thing, and that my story had inspired them to set their own boundaries. It was like closing a chapter with people who truly understood what I'd been through. Just as things seemed to be settling for good, my parents reached out one last time. They sent a message saying they'd always be there if I came to my senses and decided I wanted the family back. They framed it as if I'd walked away and would, of course, eventually come running back. But instead of getting drawn into another argument, I sent a calm, final reply. I let them know that I was living my life on my own terms and expected them to respect my independence. I told them I'd reach out if I ever felt ready, but until then, I needed space. To mark the end of this journey, I set aside a small fund for my savings, a new start for future investments and goals. It felt symbolic, like I was finally putting away the past and moving forward, free from the expectations that had weighed on me for so long. A few weekends later, I hosted an official housewarming with my friends. We decked out the place with lights, brought in food, and filled every corner with laughter and good vibes. The house felt alive, warm, and real. I'd fought for this, and now, I was here, surrounded by people who supported me wholeheartedly. As I looked around at my friends that night, the noise, the laughter, and the genuine warmth filled every part of the home. I realized that I'd finally built a space where I could truly be myself. This was my new beginning, a place free from the expectations that had followed me for so long. With the family drama settled and a newfound peace, I felt ready to embrace this next chapter with open arms, excited to see where life would take me.